Hello, my name is Brandon Koritz, and I have the great pleasure of being the chair of the Steering Council for UCLA's Undergraduate Research Week. It is my great pleasure to be able to welcome all of you, our friends, our supporters, our guests, to today's session. Um, in support of UCLA's undergraduate research and creativity. Before I introduce our speaker, I just wanted to pause and acknowledge that this has been a year much like none other we've ever experienced. And that while many of us have had difficulties either with our own health or those of friends and family members, challenges with our businesses and our livelihoods, and struggles with our family, because of COVID, um, we acknowledge these, we reflect on them today. And at the same time, we express our gratitude that despite all of these challenges, the UCLA community has been able to rise to remarkable heights, that the creative work, the research work, the scholarship, the teaching, all of these continued under very difficult circumstances. And it's in that spirit of gratitude and celebration that we meet today. It has been a real treat that we've been able to navigate now what has been our second virtual undergraduate research week. And we're incredibly appreciative that these activities have continued. Let me now introduce our guest speaker today, uh, Mr. Joel Marcus, who is the executive chairman and founder of Alexandria Real Estate Equities Incorporated. This is an urban office REIT that pioneered the life science real estate space and is today the preeminent and longest tenured owner, operator, and developer, which is uniquely focused on collaborative life science, ag tech, and technology campuses in innovation cluster locations. Since he co-founded the company in 1994, which was literally a garage startup at the time with $19 million in Series A capital, he has led Alexandria to remarkable growth, and it is now a S&P 500 company. He has expanded the company's impact well beyond the existing the lab space real estate vertical, and has established three additional and complementary vertical platforms to enhance its holistic business model. These encompass real estate, venture investment, thought leadership, and corporate responsibility. During Mr. Marcus's 27 years at Alexandria as a pioneer, an entrepreneur, an executive, and a venture capitalist, he helped form, build, and nurture a broad range of life science and ag tech companies. He founded and continues to lead Alexandria Venture Investments, the company's strategic venture capital platform. Since its inception in 1996, it has invested in many of the most promising seed, early, and growth stage companies, which are advancing breakthroughs to meaningfully improve human health. With more than $1.6 billion under management, Alexandria Venture Investments has been recognized by Silicon Valley Bank as the #1 most active biopharma corporate venture capital investor by new deal volume for 4 consecutive years. In addition to all of this work, Mr. Marcus leads Alexandria's far-reaching social responsibility initiatives, which aim to drive forward disruptive and scalable solutions that address society's most urgent challenges, including the COVID-19 epidemic, the opioid epidemic, the homelessness crisis, hunger and food insecurity, educational disparities, and climate change. To reverse the trajectory of the opioid crisis, for instance, Mr. Marcus and Alexandria have partnered with Verily, an Alphabet company, to pioneer 115, an innovative nonprofit, evidence-based recovery ecosystem providing the full continuum of care to help people live free, healthy, and addiction-free lives. Mr. Marcus was named as one of Real Estate Forum's 2017 Best Bosses in Commercial Real Estate and is a recipient of the EY Entrepreneur of the Year Award. He earned his undergraduate and JD degrees from the University of California at Los Angeles. Please join me in welcoming a Bruin and a friend, Mr. Joel Marcus.
Am I live?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Brandon, for the more than generous and gracious introduction, to Cassie and all the staff at UCLA for making this possible. And they asked me to make a few minutes of comments. And I guess let me start out with my UCLA background. I was fortunate enough to go to UCLA. In those days, it's kind of amazing. Quarterly fees were $107 a quarter, so it was kind of a great education at a bargain basement price. But I think it goes to show, and those were the great days of John Wooden and UCLA's expectation to win the National Basketball Championship, the NCAA Basketball Championship every year. Those days just don't happen to anybody anymore. But I think I went undergraduate, I was a political science major, but I felt that if I took accounting classes and got my CPA, I'd always have a job somewhere because accounting is kind of basic. I had full intention to go on to law school, which I was fortunate to do at UCLA. And I think I represent, a great example of really just a decent student. I wasn't, particularly exceptional. I worked hard, but I had 4 jobs actually when I worked at UCLA. In addition to hashing, delivering vegetables early in the morning, I delivered pap smears for a diagnostic company. And then I also did consulting on the side. So that's kind of how I ran my life in those days. But I must say that, if you graduate, you put your mind to it, it's a good example. I was very fortunate because luck and circumstance has a lot to do with, progress in life. And we're in a unique country where your skills and your capabilities can take you an awfully long way. You're not limited by, any governmental edicts or things like that. And I'm probably, poster child for that, good student, but not exceptional, who just was persistent, worked hard, used intuition, instinct, and really an egoless style of doing my work and trying to always never have people work for me, but work with me. And that's, been kind of the mantra of the company. So I was a CPA for a number of years. I then went off and did practice law for quite a number of years, and ended up my later years in law before I started Alexandria was really focused on venture capital and public market financings for biotechnology companies. I had the great pleasure of putting together the first really big biotechnology joint venture between Kirin Brewery and Amgen for recombinant erythropoietin, and then later on for GCSF, granulocyte colony stimulating factor, 2 of the really early blockbuster drugs in the biotech industry. And then there was an intersection in 1993 and 1994 where, because of my background, law, accounting, biotech, legal, and I also took a lot of chemistry in school and did chemistry. I used to have a chemistry set in high school and really liked doing all kinds of experiments. but never became a scientist because it wasn't that great. Almost burned my house down a couple of times. I ran into the founder and the vice chair of Jacobs Engineering Group, Jerry Sidarsky and Joe Jacobs, both of whom have passed away over the last decade or so. They founded Jacobs same way on kind of a shoestring. And they had an idea to create a real estate company focused on biotechnology, because no one had ever done that before. No one had ever decided in real estate to focus on, instead of retail, office, mini storage, industrial, shopping center, all kinds of things like that. Nobody had ever defined a laboratory as a real estate asset. So I spent some time doing some research, worked on putting together a business plan and a financial model, and we put together an initial Jacobs led it, 19, as Brandon said, $19 million Series A round, kind of a typical venture startup round. We own no assets other than having cash in the bank. And we got started, and we bought a first series of laboratory buildings. Nobody, again, had ever really thought about that. And our goal was to create a new niche in real estate called lab space. And the thought was, if those of you, many of you who are students and others who are graduate students, or some who are working in laboratories today, and in the science business, UCLA certainly one of the cornerstones is the great health system there, represented by Brandon and other great physicians. We'll know there are about 10,000 known diseases to mankind today, and only about 500 plus have addressable therapies. So it struck us in the early days that we're in the early days of the biotechnology and, in fact, biology revolution. If we've only addressed, very few are really true cures, 500 of 10,000 known diseases, these were the early days. And so we were fortunate to start the company like that. In 1996, we made our first investment in a biotech company up in Seattle. And that was our first investment. Today, we have under management almost approaching $2 billion of venture-like investments in biotechs. Mostly biotech. Therapeutics is a big area. Some in ag tech, because we think the agri-food tech area is critical. Human health depends on fighting disease and being well, but also good nutrition. So we do ag tech, and then we also do some in technology. Not a lot, but some. We feel like the intersection of technology and biotechnology is important, and you see more and more of that, certainly in the artificial intelligence world as it intersects biotechnology. And we think, that's really the basis of our venture investment program. We brought the company public in a small public offering in 1997. We'll celebrate our 25th anniversary on the New York Stock Exchange next year, raised about $155 million. And a reporter asked me at the IPO when I was at the New York Stock Exchange, saying, this is kind of a weird area. You own laboratories, and scientists are in these laboratories. You raised 155 million. How big in 10 or 20 years could the company get? And I said, I don't really know. There's no game plan. No one's ever done this before, but maybe someday if we reached $1 billion in market cap, we'd be thrilled. And here we sit today, 25 years after that IPO, 24, next year will be 25. And our total market capitalization today exceeds 32 billion. So who would ever know about that? I think and we've grown the company since, I think what has distinguished the company is really great hires. Most of the management team have been with the company 10, 15, 20, 25 plus years. We rarely lose any people. It's a culture that is very unique in today's world. It's a no ego culture, best idea wins, use your instinct, intuition, be flexible. We have no org chart, by the way. I banned org charts immediately because that shows hierarchy and complexity and bureaucracy. And I felt we don't ever want to have that. And Jim Collins, who's been an advisor to me and the company for many years, the famous author of the Good to Great books, really made an observation, was on the cover of our annual report a couple of years ago. And he said, he said of Alexandria, but he said great companies really have three distinctive characteristics. One is, you have to have superior financial performance, because otherwise then you can't exist as a public company. And our total return since the IPO has approached almost 2,000%, which is beaten all other REITs. And, Berkshire Hathaway, for example, we've beaten them, we've beaten Walmart, we've beaten Microsoft in those almost 24 years as far as total return. So some good comparables. We haven't beaten Amazon, because that's just a rocket ship. But most companies and most indices, the S&P 500, the Russell 2000, we've all kind of blown that away, the Dow 30, et cetera. So we've met number one. Number two was to have a distinctive impact. And I think we have. We now have about 50 million square feet of laboratories either built or in our pipeline, or in the queue to be developed in our major clusters on the East Coast and West Coast, our life science clusters. And we feel that that is really critical to our business plan, to have a base of operations. And as part of this distinctive impact, we're really partners to the biotech industry and the scientists in providing the infrastructure and the capital to help them make the next great discovery. We were an early investor in Moderna back many years ago, and what they've done. The mRNA vaccine actually is a small part of what Moderna is. And so we were there at the beginning. So I think we've made a distinctive impact. We're landlord and partner to almost 700 pharmaceutical, biotechnology, and other related healthcare firms, by far and away leading the world in that. And we feel very honored to have that distinctive impact. And then the third thing is in addition to having superior performance, distinctive impact, lasting endurance, Jim Collins said. And we've been here now, we're into our 28th year, and it's important, and we're just getting started. Those are the qualities of, I think, great companies. And hopefully the people that we deal with and that deal with us feel like we're the go-to partner. Our job is to get it done and have no ego about it. Best results and best ideas really matter. A couple of other random things before I kick it back to Brandon. I think we're going to do some Q&A. I would say is we have four verticals, as Brandon said. One is infrastructure, two is venture, three is thought leadership. We just did an infectious disease summit about a week ago, kicked off by Tony Fauci. We had the FDA being part of that. We focused a lot on the vaccines, the therapies, the testing, and really looking at new modalities. And importantly, what could this collective group of leaders do to advance the field of infectious disease? Because it's really been a stepchild of healthcare for a long time, because it's not, there is not a demand oftentimes, certainly for pandemic, until you have one. So, and it's generally government driven. So we're trying to develop kind of new ways of doing things. And certainly one of the most important things is to repatriate supply chains for a lot of healthcare products and attributes that go into fighting a pandemic and that we need here in this country just going forward, whether they be a pandemic or not. Our clusters and then our final vertical is corporate social responsibility. We started that way before it became popular to do that. Brandon mentioned one of our big projects we did with Verily, the Alphabet company, and we're very proud of that. 115 is our full continuum of care, data-driven, one-of-a-kind opioid addiction campus in Dayton, Ohio. 115 stands for, in 2017, when we started this effort, 115 Americans were dying each and every day from opioid addiction. And we felt we wanted to make a statement and do something that was important. So we built this campus in conjunction with Verily, data-driven. We've already seen 3,000 patients in the heart of Dayton. And the goal was to just stop the traditional treatment of addiction, of opioid addiction, which is 28 detox and kick them back out on the street, 90+% recidivism rate, which doesn't really work. So our campus is detox, clean, sober, clean living, family reunification, job training, and job placement. Because if you don't do it like that, it's putting a Band-Aid over a big wound. And we are trying to adopt and transport that concept to homelessness on the West Coast. We're pioneering something. It may either be in Seattle or California. We're in the early days right now of trying to proof of concept. But homelessness is not simply either down on your luck or not simply having a roof over your head. The vast majority of homeless suffer from addiction, mental illness. So you have to have a continuum of care fully, and you have to have a data-driven kind of platform. Otherwise, we probably are never going to overcome these problems. I kind of get disappointed at politicians always talking so casually about, the easy thing to do is just find a hotel room or something, but that doesn't do very much. So those are the 4 verticals we work on. And then finally, before I kick it back to Brandon, I'd say we're focused on great life science clusters here in the United States and Canada. We have a little bit of presence in China. We did have a small presence in India, which we closed down, and we've never been in Europe. But the hallmarks of a cluster, and we think there is one going on in LA in the early stages. It's about a 25-year gestation period, but you have to have great location, world-class location. You have to have a real concentration of great scientific talent, clinical talent, research talent, which is kind of number 2. Number 3, you need a base of strong management to grow companies and bring the commercial and governmental and academic sectors together to translate. That's really the key, discoveries into actual things that can impact positively mankind, or humankind, I should say. And then finally, you have to have a risk capital, an abundance of risk capital, because the government can't really do it. They're not an entrepreneurial vehicle. And so that's really important. And I would just finish by saying this part is what's really enabled us to be successful is that entrepreneurial spirit, a free market system. I mean, imagine if the private sector didn't exist and you just had the government and a pandemic hit. Where would we be today? I'm not sure we would be anywhere. It would be pretty bleak out there. We wouldn't be protected by the vaccines we've had and being able to conduct normal business, which we've been open. All of our laboratories have been open 24/7 since day 1 of the pandemic. So with that, let me turn it back to Brandon. I think we're going to do some Q&A together.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Joel. And just as a reminder for all of the people participating, if you have questions, please feel free to put them into the chat box, the Q&A chat box, and they'll come to me. Joel, if we could go back to the very beginning of your career, was there a particular person or event or spark that made you think that this intersection between real estate and biotech was the niche for you?
Yeah, probably was Joe Jacobs, who was the founder of Jacobs Engineering, which today is a multi-billion-dollar, design, architecture, construction firm. It used to be headquartered where I am today, here in Pasadena, but because of, unfortunately, oppressive taxes in California, they moved to Plano, Texas, about 3 years ago. And that's part of just being a public company. If you're spending a lot of money in a location and you can go to another location and operate more efficiently and be able to invest more wisely, then you do that. A sad day. But I would say Joe Jacobs, who was a chemical engineer by training, and he probably had the most impact on me. He was a Lebanese immigrant, came over from Lebanon with literally nothing. and built Jacobs, and was one of the smartest, most adept guys, both at the technical side, but also at the business side, and a great humanitarian as well.
Good. What is it that...
He did not go to UCLA, unfortunately, went to RPI.
That's okay. We won't hold that against him. He can still be a good guy. What is it, would you say, that drives you and inspires you to pick particular challenges that face society and want to work on those?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I mean, the healthcare side, the disease side was easy, because if we only are addressing a small number of diseases today, we need to do better, as you guys know who are on the front lines. And when it came to nutrition, it was very critical. We've been in the agri-food tech area for over 20 years, and you just look at this country and even overseas, the quality of nutrition, the lack of nutrition, the food insecurity is a huge area. So those were obvious. What wasn't obvious was I never imagined myself being, at the forefront of the opioid epidemic here a couple of years ago. And it really came out of a conversation Andy Conrad and I had at JP Morgan, who is the CEO of Verily. And we basically were saying, oh my God, have you seen what's going on? And he said, absolutely. And we said, well, we're not healthcare providers. We're a real estate company. Verily is really a very data-driven healthcare offshoot of Alphabet, Google. But none of us provide healthcare, but we're observant of this is a crisis that we just can't, nobody's doing enough. And so we did a bunch of research. We came up with this idea. We spent some time looking at places in Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia that were among the hardest hit, and then hit upon Dayton. But that was really the inspiration. It was almost like nobody's doing enough. There's no good program. And now we see homelessness. I was just in Austin, Texas the other day and noticing, huge numbers of homeless or surrounding City Hall, downtown, along the river. They just voted this proposition where they're going to do something about it. But here in LA, we're suffering in ways that are incomprehensible, and the politicians seem incapable, unwilling, unable to do anything. So we're going to go forward and develop this model we think is going to work.
One of the interesting themes that comes out of, from my perspective, all aspects of your work is this theme of partnership. You just spoke of this partnership with Verily. How is it that you came to realize the power of having partners?
Well, that kind of comes through my background. So one of my specialties when I was a lawyer was strategic partnering. I was kind of maybe the number one lawyer in the country when it started. Today, it's very commonplace. In 1983 and 84, when we did the Amgen erythropoietin deal, I had developed an expertise in joint venture partnering and you might say strategic alliances. Cross-border was a specialty that I developed. And I learned early on, you could take a beer company in Japan, put them together with and in those days, Amgen's market cap was 160 million. It was, and in fact, they weren't even sure what they were going to do, for a business, and put those two very odd groups together in a way that created maybe one of the most spectacular partnerships in the world to finish the development, do the clinical trials, launch, and in fact, make a huge success for EPO. And I learned early on that was the secret to success in many cases, because everybody doesn't have all the tools and all the capital and all the capabilities, but where you can partner up and provide synergistic ways to do it, it really became pretty evident. So that was the inspiration that I had early on that helps now.
Yeah, I want to continue this line of questioning because I actually think you're incredibly modest, because the partnerships that you're creating aren't just between business partners or a business and a technology partner. These partnerships create entire communities where, There are people in the hospitality universe that get to ride on this. There are people in the arts community that get to participate in this. Can you speak to that? Because this is, you really are creating communities of people.
Well, thank you. I would say that maybe a good example of partnership is when we started the company, we acquired a few assets outside of Boston on Route 128, kind of more known as a technology corridor. We always coveted being in Cambridge, but we're a small company and couldn't do it. And then lo and behold, we had a kind of a blockbuster opportunity in 2006. And we teamed up with MIT to buy from them Tech Square, with Technology Square, which sits right across from on Main Street, right across from the science campus at MIT. We took two old buildings and converted them from office or kind of decrepit old buildings into state-of-the-art lab buildings. Moderna's headquarters is now there in that complex. And we partnered with MIT to create a real campus. We brought two world-class food. One is kind of a fast order. The other is kind of a more restaurant. We developed a gym. We brought in a bank. We created this retail environment. We created kind of a walking and a park environment in the middle of the complex. It's about 1.3 million square feet. So we went from zero, partnering with MIT, to today in the greater Boston area, we have almost 15 million square feet. And next to MIT are the largest laboratory landowner in Cambridge. And so that's a good idea of doing it with a partner. Another good example is up in Stanford Research Park, which has been historically kind of a quiet and backwater place for biotech. It's mostly been the HP garage kind of effort going on there. And when Mark Tessa Levine, a close ally of ours from New York at Rockefeller, and he was at Stanford before, a Rhodes Scholar and just a great human being, decided to want to create an incubation effort for life science there. Stanford chose us to partner with them to do that. We're just going to open, it'll be a short, stone's throw from campus. We're going to open in September, 100,000 square foot building, all startup life science company, kind of white glove service to try to translate life science out of Stanford into companies. Historically, Stanford's been world-class in technology. In fact, we did Google's first campus for them in Mountain View when they were a Series A startup in those days, 1998. And look where they are today. But it hasn't quite happened at the pace of technology as technology companies were for biotech. So those are two examples of world-class institutions where we're partnering. And you're so right. We couldn't just go do it ourselves, and they didn't have the wherewithal to do it themselves. So the partnership was ideal.
Yeah, one of the other questions that comes up is sometimes there are groups that may have different cultures, and you spoke to culture. We'll come back to that in a bit. How is it that you get cultures to at least be willing to align a little bit? So for instance, maybe the world of the artificial intelligence universe with the biotech group, not necessarily known for having exactly the same values. How do you bring them together?
Yeah, that's a work in process. A good example, we've been involved with a company both from an investment and an infrastructure side called In Citro. It is probably the earliest company spun out of Stanford aimed at artificial intelligence to apply to the biotech area to make the ability to, I would say, make more intelligent, less capital risk decisions in the development side, or I should say in the research and then development side for biotechnology compounds. Still a work in process. They've gone from a startup. They just, I think, closed the most recent round at north of $1 billion. Daphne Kohler, a great AI scientist out of Stanford, is the CEO. She's an awesome person. And so I think that's still a work in process. But I think what's interesting is this is a kind of a great juxtaposition. The biotech industry kind of converges and assimilates around these clusters. and they're very collaborative. Even though they're competitive, they're collaborative, they're cooperative, they work together. Scientists move from one to the other. In the technology world, and we do have a few big technology clients of ours. Facebook is a big tenant of ours, Google, Amazon, et cetera. They come to us, and if they, for example, Facebook is in one of our lab buildings, weirdly enough, in Cambridge, and we asked them, well, why do you want to be in this building? They said, well, it has great infrastructure, it's highly secure, but by the way, if we sign a lease, don't let Google in, don't let Amazon in, don't let this one in, don't let that one in. So the mindsets of the two industries are actually quite different.
Yeah, yeah. What this collaboration, cooperation, frenemy, I guess,
Yep.
idea is something I think is on a lot of people's minds in this period of time with COVID. There's been a remarkable recognition of the value of working together. And yet at the same time, at the end of the day, these companies have to make money on their investment. Can you speak to that tension?
Yeah, I think it is a tension that I think in the private sector actually is pretty seamless and fluid. I think it is many people who've come into the commercial sector in biotech have been in academic science, clinical medicine, governmental, whether it's regulatory science or, out of the NIH, and they've come into the private sector and have assimilated. And so the commercial side of our world, whether it be big pharma or biotech, I think has so many people who've spent. Mark is a great example. Mark was at Stanford for a number of years, was president of Rockefeller, who was also chief scientific officer of Genentech. So he's a perfect blend of the academic side, clinical side, and the commercial side, which you don't tend to find a lot of times in other industries. So I think we're very blessed in the biotech industry to have that kind of DNA almost mixed up within. So it works, and it's pretty clear, and vaccines are a good example. If there was no market for vaccines, or there was no way to get a return on investment, no one would have any motivation. Canada's actually a sad and important example of that. Canada's, one of the greatest countries in the world, about 10% of the US economy, kind of a quasi-socialized medicine system. And a number of years ago, they really backed off of all money into research and development for pharmaceutical companies and really groundbreaking research. And as a consequence, most pharma and biotech companies exited the country. They kept offices there for distribution and so forth. And when the pandemic hit, the government realized they had missed the boat. They didn't have a vaccine supply. They didn't have a local R&D base that they could generate these. So they were dependent upon the United States or other countries. And I think now you're starting to see at the governmental level and the provincial level in Canada a much greater awareness of, we need to be funding innovative science that can translate into commercial products. And that's a really, the key, that as you kind of, the value of research, the value of research just for research purposes, if you can't translate it to help humankind, is maybe good, but it's not great.
I'm going to ask you to pivot slightly now, and I'm going
Sure.
to ask you to put your mentor hat on.
Sure.
There are a lot of people attending today who are here at UCLA who have an interest and a passion in research. What advice would you give an undergraduate who is nurturing an interest in becoming a biotech researcher?
Well, I would give great enthusiasm. I think we're in the early days and the dawn of biology, as I've given you some of the stats and some of the reasons I think you see today. Biology is super complex, as you know, Brandon, and trying to uncover complicated diseases in our human body, which has so many interactive systems. Just think about COVID, the so-called syndrome of long haul syndrome for COVID, certain COVID victims, how complicated that is to figure out what are the causes? What are the, potential treatments? What are the ways to go at that? So I think one of the most noble and patriotic efforts is to be a researcher in groundbreaking science today. But again, not pure science, but science that can be translated into products, services, and capabilities that can benefit humankind here in the United States and worldwide. To me, that'd be the highest calling. I'm probably not smart enough to be a scientist, but I would say to me that would be a calling that would be second to none.
That's great. Now, if here's a question: what advice would you give to someone who has an interest that is maybe science adjacent, maybe a non-traditional student who doesn't have the passion for the science but wants to support the work? How might you direct that person?
Yeah, I mean, I may be a good example of that. I loved chemistry, had a passion for chemistry, but didn't really want to major in it. And I ended up going into accounting to have a backdrop in case I could never get a job. Law was my passion, and law led me into founding Alexandria. So I think there are lots of open routes for people, whether it be in the financial side of things, dealing in the biotechnology area, I can think of, dealing with bringing people into the world of biotech, working on clinical trial type work that's not necessarily purely scientific based. So there's a lot of adjacencies there. And I think the world is very open. And, people always say, what do you think about what you would be doing 5 years, 10 years, 15? I don't ever think about that. I think more about what I'm doing today and how I can position what I'm doing, for the betterment, and luck and circumstance and drive will propel people. But I think there's so many adjacencies today. I mean, just look at clusters. There's so much need in a cluster for so many different skill sets and really core competencies that if you don't want to be a hardcore scientist, there's an awful lot of other things you can do for sure. So, you can make an impact. You can even be an impact, in the thought leadership side or the corporate social responsibility side. But that's a key.
So let's explore these core competencies for a second. One of the things that I'm struck by when I think about your story is how well you were able to align people with different agendas and different incentives. You got them to work together. This is not taught in a classroom. How would you advise a student to develop these kinds of skills?
Well, I'm not sure. That's a really hard question. I think it comes from instinct and intuition, and also comes from one of having a higher purpose. We have a hashtag at the company we use regularly, which is people, passion, purpose. And I think that's how you have to think about it, rather than if we're building a building, we don't think of it as just a bricks and mortar effort. We think of it as, give you an example. We teamed up with Merck a couple of years ago for their West Coast, the first time they've ever done this, West Coast Regional R&D Center. Roger Perlmutter was leading that effort. And, so we don't just think about the bricks and mortar, we think about what science is going into the building, what people and what cadre of skill sets need to go into the building. What's the design that's going to make a place more inspirational, easier to work in, more collaborative, easier to cooperate. So it's not just, as I say, like a simple, it's a whole different kind of penumbra of other considerations. And so I think that's the way to think about this effort, not just, a traditional mindset. So I think thinking out of the box, being, again, no ego, best idea. How do we jointly do something that is way better than anyone could ever imagine or do before, to really bring, these great minds to bear in a way that can really make an impact on human health. And so I don't know, I don't know that there's any formula. I mean, I read a lot of different books. I'm inspired by a lot of different people. I think Jim Collins was a key person. I mean, he taught us in his many books, you know, Good to Great, Great by Choice, How the Mighty Fail. You know, don't ever take anything for granted. You know, you look at Kodak. Kodak thought they were the greatest company in the world. They hung out in Rochester, New York, which is, I'm sure, a great place, but they couldn't recruit young, great minds to Rochester. They were going to places like Austin or, you know, Salt Lake or Palo Alto or Boise or, you know, Denver, stuff like that. And they didn't anticipate the digital revolution and got their, you know, their butt kicked. And so you have to be mindful of those things. So I think a lot of it is Jim taught us get the right people on the right seats in the bus, because if you don't do that, the bus is likely to crash and it's not going to work out. So much is really driven, I think, by three words, and I mentioned them earlier in my intro: instinct, intuition, and flexibility. And maybe the most important of all is no ego. Best idea wins.
It's such an interesting concept to select people who can work well with others. And I actually like this egoless idea. When you're interviewing people for positions, how is it that you know someone is egoless or can fit that culture? How do you know?
It's pretty obvious. You know, if I say I all the time, if I talk about, you know, my accomplishments, or, you know, I I just rejected a applicant not too long ago, and the first thing he asked me, because I interview everybody that comes to the company while they're in the interview process, every single person, and I asked this person to tell me a little bit about kind of what they were, you know, why come to Alexandria, what were they're doing. And they said, well, I want to come here because I want to move up the corporate ladder. I want to be, you know, a senior leader and all that. And that's almost an instant no reject, because the answer is to come here to do great work. And by doing great work, you will ascend, you know, in not a corporate ladder or not just compensation, but you will ascend in, most importantly, your peers and those who you work with respecting you. That's the greatest ascension you can get. So to me, that was an easy no. And I told, you know, the folks that were interviewing, oh my gosh, you know, Joe is such a great guy. And I go like, no, he isn't thinking right.
I'm also appreciating that so much of what you and your team do requires partnerships with both local governments and regional and national governments.
Yeah.
What would you like to see from your partners on that side? What makes for a good opportunity from a governmental perspective?
Yeah, that's a complex question these days, because we're in the Seattle area, we're in the Bay Area, we're in here, LA in a small way, San Diego, Greater Boston, New York City, the Maryland area, North Carolina. I think where we find the greatest advancement of science and the intersection of commercial and academic. I mean, take the Research Triangle area, anchored by Duke, North Carolina State, and North Carolina. So you have three great universities. You have a very high quality workforce. Right now, you know, so many companies, especially in the gene therapy and cell therapy, are moving there. And you ask why that is. It is because you don't have to go through a litany of ridiculous governmental hoops to run through to do business, to operate, to build, and so forth. Whereas in the city of San Francisco, not to pick them in particular, but a good example, we had a great tenant who wanted to come to the city recently and said, the reason I'm not coming there, I'm going down the peninsula, is the city is kind of a mess with homelessness. It seems ungovernable. And another thing that seemed troubling was they have a gross receipts tax. So we have a profitable business that we make a lot of money on. And if I come there, they're going to take a slice of that. And they're doing that. That money's supposed to go to solve the homeless problem, but it's getting worse, not better. And the company decided to go to South San Francisco, the city of South San Francisco. Great example of choosing, and we didn't do it. It was the company. It's a biotech company, but it has a research and development arm, but another business that's very profitable. And they decided to go to South San Francisco because there is no gross receipts tax. The city is very on top of it's user friendly, and it's not they don't have a homeless problem that's out of touch, that's out of touch. And so that's a good example. So I would hope that over time the city, and this is true in cities like Philadelphia. My daughter went to Wharton, and I've always loved Philadelphia as a city, but they have a stacking of taxes, including high payroll tax and other taxes that keep people from building businesses there. Well, there are a lot of ways to attract people. That's probably the last thing you want to be doing. So those are things that local jurisdictions should think more carefully about. Why is Tesla moving to Austin? Why is Michael Dell stayed there? Why are all these Silicon Valley companies moving to Austin? Because, not necessarily Austin is well run, because it's got some of its issues, but it's a no tax environment. It's you can get into business, we can build a factory, we can do things quickly. You don't have that in a number of other jurisdictions.
So this is really great. I want to pivot to something a little bit personal here, if I may.
Sure.
How is it that you manage this very broad portfolio and still keep yourself sane with the stress of day-to-day life? What techniques do you use?
Well, I have good healthcare at UCLA, so that's number one. Number two is I'm not a particularly stress laden person, so I don't rarely ever feel stressful, even though the environment, people, that's just not my personality. I do something every day, physical exercise or whatever. And I'm pretty focused on results. And I'm pretty well organized. So I don't feel stress even during the pandemic. I mean, my major goal was to try to make sure our team was, healthy. Our laboratories were open. We had, great COVID protocols and stuff, but, stress would not have helped it. So I don't know. It's just a simple, I think it's in your DNA or it's not. That seems to me, I just lucked out because I can do that, but I'm not sure, just you can learn it. I think it's just in the DNA or it's not.
Fair enough. As you think about all of the projects that you've had, all of the companies that you've had an opportunity to help build, what is the one project that you're most proud of?
Well, I would say, in today's world, there are many, but in today's world, I'd say it was Moderna. We were an early investor in the company, have invested since. We have provided them their we're their landlord to a large amount of square footage. We helped them develop their manufacturing and doing more of it in Norwood outside of Cambridge, their headquarters in Cambridge. I was, met and was involved with Stefan Bonsall, when he was early on there. We were, pretty involved in the early days with Flagship, who founded them. But I sent Stefan an email a while back, and I said something like, thank you for saving the world. And literally, together with Pfizer, J&J, hopefully AstraZeneca will get going here. There's a couple of others, Novavax, et cetera. But I think that's one where the mRNA platform was originally intended to address a whole host of diseases, none of which really were focused on pandemic kinds of issues. And only by virtue of the emergency did they kind of, they had developed vaccine technology, but, nobody imagined the COVID SARS virus, flying out of wherever it flew out of in Wuhan. And I think they made a pivot, and these guys were working, every night, every day, weekends. I mean, expended an incredible amount of of effort, and we were there with them on the front lines, assisting them. So I'd say just today, because of COVID, that's probably the thing that I feel best about, that we as a collective Alexandria family have been part of the Moderna story. I didn't get a Moderna vaccine, by the way. I ended up getting a Pfizer vaccine at the forum in Englewood.
Well, I was going to say, if that's not so bad. Helping to save the world, that's not such a bad thing to be proud of.
We were a teeny part of it, but that is a story that I think in today's world probably resonates with our people, people, passion, purpose, almost more than any story that we have.
Yeah. Let me ask you this for the very last question I'm going to ask. What would you like to share with everyone that I haven't asked?
I think the UCLA health system is second to none. I think you're an incredible physician. I think what has been built at UCLA is precious. And I would say, I'm just thankful to be a beneficiary of that. So to me, that would be what I would give back to you guys. My education there was, really a foundation for me, enabled me to go do what I've done. And I'm always deeply appreciative to UCLA in general, but I think the health system is one that is just so special, because if you don't have your health, you can't do anything else. And so thank you, Brandon, and thank you, to the entire UCLA health team.
Well, Joel, thank you. Thank you for being willing to give so graciously of your time. Thank you
Pleasure.
For sharing your experiences. Thank you for being a wonderful Bruin, and thank you for being a dear, dear friend.
Thank you all. Real pleasure and honor. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everybody. And thank you for joining us for this session from Undergraduate Research Week. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you so much. Bye now.